let's talk about how to make better decisions. This is my own personal guide to making better decisions because I've seen some people making spectacularly bad decisions in the last few days. And I'd like to help all of us not make those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, if I remember right, 12 separate rules to make better decisions. And I'm going to start with my number one rule to making better decisions, which is the worst time to make a decision is at the time it has to be made. Think about this for a moment. At that moment, if a decision has to be made, you oftentimes have pressure coming from many different sources, some of which may not be in your best interest. It's in their interest for you to make that decision, buying something, going off and doing something, all those kinds of things like that. Oftentimes, you also have deadline pressure happening at that moment where there's pressure that you have to make that decision right this minute. And you also may not be thinking clearly at that moment. So let me just give you a classic example for many people. Let's just imagine that you're a person who maybe struggles with making bad decisions when you're inebriated, okay? And so here's an example. The decision you're facing is, should I go out drinking with my friends tonight? Okay. Or maybe you've made a decision. You've gone through 12-step process and you're not doing this anymore or whatever it is, but your friends are pressuring you to go out and do this. And they're doing it not in your best interest, but because they want to go and they would like you there. Maybe so they'll feel less guilty about doing it, or maybe they just like the jokes you make or whatever, but they're doing it not for your best interest. They're doing it because it's good for them, not necessarily because it's good for you. And they're leaving right now. If you don't get in that car right now, there's all kinds of problems, and you may be tired, you may be emotional, you may have all kinds of other things going on. As you can see, this is not one of those situations that's conducive to making a good decision. As an example. So my personal number one rule is the best time to make most decisions is well before they have to be made. So there are certain advantages in doing this. The first one is there's certain kinds of decisions that you can make like once and never have to make them again. And once you've made that decision, I'm done. That decision's made. So let's go back to our example. Let's say you've been through a 12-step program and you've decided you're not going to drink anymore. Okay, your friends are pressuring you to go out to drink, and you just say, no, I've made the decision. I don't do that anymore. That decision's made. You never have to make it again. Now, clearly, this particular rule works with moral decisions, but it works in many other areas too. So, for example, let's just take you've gone out, you interviewed, you found what really looks like a really good job. They put it on paper, you've accepted the offer. Okay, so you can say to yourself, all right, here's what's going to happen. This is a good job. At least it appears in everything I've done in the interview process, like this is a good job. I know it's going to have challenges as I get into it. Every job does, okay? There's always somewhere in the boss relationship with you, somebody who's going to maybe not get along with you. They may be a jerk, whatever it is. Or maybe things weren't given to you properly, or maybe there's just going to be the normal job pressures that are going to happen. You're going to have challenges, but you just make that decision. I'm going to give this my all for 1 year. Then I'll reevaluate and see what it looks like. That way, when you walk out of a meeting where it wasn't a particularly pleasant meeting, maybe you were being blamed for something, maybe you were getting yelled at, maybe there's lots of pressure, all those kinds of things like that. You don't have to make that decision that day. It's like, no, I'm in this for a year. I'm going to give it all for a year, and then I'm going to go on. Okay, so let me now give you, that was my number one thing, is most decisions you don't want to make at the time that decision has to be made. And many of those decisions, especially a moral one, can be made once and you never have to make them again. I'm going to give you now 12 decision-making tips. So the first one is one I just talked about. Make them early whenever possible. Second one, I've already mentioned too. Make them once whenever possible. So you don't have to keep coming back and reconsidering making that decision over again. Now, let's do some new ones. you do have the option in life to make a decision for X amount of time, like 1 year, like I mentioned in the job kind of situation. So you can say, okay, so I've made this decision right now, and I'm going to hold to that decision for 6 months or for a year or whatever. And that way it's not an absolute permanent decision, because some things you just don't know where life is going to be 6 months, a year, 3 years, 40 years down the road. Okay. Fourth, create rules of thumb to make non-plannable decisions earlier. So, as I've said, best make the decision well in advance. If you can't make the decision in advance, sometimes you have to make decisions right that moment. Like, do I change lanes to try to get off on this exit, even though it would be a stupid idea for me to do so because it's not safe? Okay. So you can create rules of thumb to make those non-plannable decisions earlier. So easier. So let me just give you a couple of examples. So let's say you're running a business, and when you're running a business, you're constantly faced with decisions that I have found a really easy decision to make is to say, what is best for my customer? And when I make that a rule of thumb, that in most cases, I tend to choose the thing that's best for my customer. What ends up happening is the business is a whole lot easier to run, and you tend to be more profitable because you're doing decisions that make your customer want to stick with you. And it's a great rule of thumb to use in business. Second, let's just say you got a marriage kind of decision. Should I bring this point up? Should I do this? Maybe ask yourself this question. What would someone who's committed to marriage for life do in this situation? Okay, there's a rule of thumb. Here's a third rule of thumb. If you just say, because I'm honest, this is what I'm going to do. It's remarkable how oftentimes taking some core moral principle that you've decided, I'm honest, whatever that is, and once you've stated that, then you just keep coming back and say, because I'm that, what decision should I make? And oftentimes it just goes, well, it's there. It's resolved. You don't even have to think about it. Okay. Next is very few decisions in life are irreversible. And a lot of people have a really, really rough time making decisions because they forget this. And so they get into this anxiety. They think they're making a permanent decision that they're going to have to be living under 40 years from now. But you know what? Very few of them are irreversible, and we can just recognize that, and it just don't have to work so hard on making that decision. Number 6, constantly debrief and learn from your decisions. So, hey, when we go through life, we make a decision. We then see how that turned out, and then we learn from it and make changes for the future, because none of us have the ability to see clearly everything that's going to happen in the future. If we are constantly debriefing our decision and say, was that a good idea? How did that work out? How could I make that better? It helps you make better decisions for the future. Next, be intentional and morally based. So I mentioned the moral base a few moments ago, but being intentional where you're saying, okay, I am really working on raising an amazing child here. All right, based on that, is it really a good idea for me to go do this thing? How will that affect my intentional decision to raise this amazing child if I'm going to be waking up tomorrow with a major head hangover and not even sure what I did between midnight and 3 a.m.? So you can make, when you are intentional, it makes a lot of decisions for you. Next, there's this principle called the sunk cost principle, which basically says, hey, when you come to a point of a decision, what you've spent, the time, the effort, and those kinds of things you've done in the past really have no indication as to what is the right decision on this. So here's this house. I'm in it. I'm trying to decide if I should move or not, but I spent a lot of money buying a new dishwasher and a new furnace. just a year ago, well, that's sunk cost. That's beyond you. It no longer influences the decision you're making about whether you should move or not. In other words, move on when it's right, not sticking by, hey, all the time and effort that you spent getting to this point. Next, you have many more options than your brain thinks you do. Your brain tends to think there's only 2 options here. And it's like, no, you have lots more. Number 10, wherever possible, step back from an instant decision. Most decisions can be made after non-pressured consideration. Give them that chance to do it. 11, some people should never trust their gut. Figure out if you're one of them. That one's really key. Okay, and number 12, everyone should find a trusted advisor to help them when they need help making decisions, especially if you're one who should never trust their gut. So those are some rules that I put together. Some of them may be more valuable. Some of them may be ones you've thought of. Some of them may be ones that you never thought of. I'm sure I missed a few. What did I miss? Let me know. Put it in the comments. I'd love to hear your decision-making principles. This is Don Crowther saying, just go do this stuff.